Ivy's fingers froze over her laptop keyboard, her breath catching in her throat as her gaze locked onto a familiar silhouette across the sunlit cafe. Before we begin, thank you for being here. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy stories like this. There, sitting at a corner table with an espresso cup and an air of absolute authority, was a face she hadn't seen in 8 years but would recognize anywhere. Eric D. Redfield, her first love, the boy who had promised her forever, then disappeared without explanation the day after his 21st birthday. She gripped the edge of her laptop tighter, suddenly grateful for the potted fern that partially obscured her from his direct line of sight. "Miss, are you waiting for someone?" asked the barista, approaching with a concerned expression. "We're about to close this section for a private event. Mr. Redfield has reserved the entire back half." "Mr. Redfield?" Brenda echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Right, sorry," Brenda mumbled, gathering her translation files and tucking a strand of brown hair behind her ear. At 29, she hadn't imagined she'd still be living in the same city, still translating shipping contracts in overpriced cafes she could barely afford. But life had taught her to stay small, stay invisible, and after Eric's vanishing act 8 years ago, she had built her entire existence around never being hurt like that again. She took a shallow breath and began packing her laptop, purposely keeping her movements slow to avoid drawing attention. As she fumbled with her charger cord, her mind raced back to that autumn semester when she and Eric had been inseparable, the way he'd held her hand during late-night study sessions, his ambitious dreams of escaping his family's debt, the promise he'd made under the campus streetlights about building a life together. And then his unexplained disappearance that left her shattered and questioning everything she thought she knew about love. "Ma'am, did you need a to-go cup for that chamomile tea?" The barista's voice pulled Brenda back to the present. I didn't order chamomile tea," she replied, confused. The barista smiled politely, gesturing to a porcelain cup that had appeared at her table. "Compliments of Mr. Redfield." Brenda's heart stopped. She looked up and found Eric staring directly at her, his tattooed arms folded across his chest, his expression unreadable but deliberate. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't searching the room wondering if she might be there. He had known. And as the cafe staff began quietly ushering other patrons toward the exit, as a man in a dark suit positioned himself near the door, as the atmosphere shifted from casual to controlled, Brenda realized with mounting dread that this encounter was no accident. She wasn't a customer who happened to wander into his space. She was already in his territory, and had been for far longer than she understood. Brenda's apartment was a study in deliberate minimalism. 400 square feet on the 3rd floor of a building with no elevator, beige walls she'd never bothered to paint, and furniture that came from estate sales where no one asked questions. The only photograph on display was a generic landscape she'd bought at a thrift store, mountains she'd never visited, taken by a stranger whose name she'd never know. Perfect. She preferred it that way. No memories pinned to walls. No evidence of a life that mattered. Every morning followed the same script. Wake at 6:30. Black coffee, no sugar. Shower exactly 8 minutes. Dress in muted grays and navy blues. Colors that photographed poorly, that disappeared in crowds. By 7:45, she was at her desk in the corner by the window, translating technical documents for clients whose faces she'd never see. Shipping manifests, legal contracts, instruction manuals for industrial equipment. Words stripped of emotion, relationships reduced to transactions. Her phone rarely rang. When it did, it was usually Claire, Megan, or Tanya, her 3-woman support system who met her for brunch once a month at the same diner. They knew she was a translator. They knew she lived alone. They knew she didn't date. They didn't know about Eric. None of them did. Brenda had decided years ago that sharing that wound would make it real again, and she'd worked too hard to bury it. Better to let them think she was naturally solitary, naturally cautious. Better to be seen as the quiet friend who listened well and offered no drama than the heartbroken girl still mourning a ghost. By noon, she'd usually completed 2 contracts. By 3, she'd take her only break, a walk to the bodega 2 blocks away for a pre-made sandwich and chamomile tea. The owner, Mr. Patel, never asked about her day. He paid cash. He handed her the bag. The exchange required nothing of her. By 6, she was back at her desk. By 9, she'd close her laptop and heat up leftovers. By 10, she was in bed, reading translated novels in languages she barely spoke. French, German, sometimes Italian, because other people's stories in other people's words felt safer than anything written for her. This was her life. Controlled. Predictable. Forgettable. She told herself it was enough. That wanting more was what had destroyed her before. That being invisible meant being protected. But some nights, when the apartment felt too quiet and the walls too close, she'd catch herself wondering what Eric had become. Whether he ever thought of her. Whether his disappearance had hurt him the way it had hollowed her out. Then she'd remind herself. It didn't matter. He was gone. She was safe. And safety, she'd learned, was the only promise you could keep. She just didn't know that while she'd been building her life on sand, someone had been laying the foundation beneath her feet. Watching, protecting, controlling. She didn't know her invisibility was an illusion. Not yet. They met in a philosophy seminar during sophomore year. Brenda had chosen a seat in the back as always. Eric arrived late, drenched from rain, and took the empty chair beside her without asking. When the professor posed a question about free will versus determinism, Eric's hand shot up. "We're all trapped," he said, his voice carrying an edge that made the room go quiet. "The question isn't whether we're free. It's whether we can live with our cages." Brenda had stared at him. He'd stared back. Something ignited. Within weeks, they were inseparable. Eric was brilliant. Philosophy major with a minor in economics, always 3 steps ahead in every conversation. But he was also broke in ways that went beyond textbooks and ramen. His father had died 2 years earlier, leaving behind gambling debts that swallowed his mother whole. Eric worked 2 jobs, stocking shelves at night, tutoring during the day, and still sent money home every week. Brenda loved him for his intensity, his refusal to complain, the way he looked at her like she was the only still point in his spinning world. By junior year, they'd moved into a cramped studio off campus. Eric would study until 2 a.m., then crawl into bed and pull her close, whispering plans about the future. After graduation, he'd get a corporate job, something stable, something that paid. They'd save money, travel, build something permanent. The night before his 21st birthday, they sat on the fire escape sharing cheap wine. The city lights blurred below them, and Eric reached into his pocket, pulling out a simple silver band. "It's not an engagement ring," he said, slipping it onto her finger. "Not yet. But it's a promise. When I fix things, when I get us out of this mess, I'm going to marry you, Brenda. You're the only thing in my life that makes sense." She'd kissed him, tasting wine and hope and forever. The next morning he was gone. No note on the pillow. No text. His clothes still hung in the closet. His philosophy books stacked on the desk. But his wallet, his phone, his keys vanished. Brenda waited 1 hour. Then 4. Then called his mother, who sounded confused, then panicked, then coldly resigned. "He made his choice," she said before hanging up. Brenda filed a missing person report. The police found nothing. No bank activity. No social media trail. No body. Eric D. Redfield had simply erased himself from existence. For months, Brenda tortured herself with possibilities. Accident, amnesia, kidnapping, murder. But the cruelest truth was the simplest. He'd left, chosen to disappear, chosen to leave her without explanation, without closure, without even the mercy of goodbye. She'd removed the silver ring after 6 months, packed his books after a year, stopped saying his name after 2. 8 years of silence taught her one lesson. Love was a trap, and the only way to survive was to make sure no one ever held the key again. She just didn't know he'd never let go. Brenda stood frozen, staring at the chamomile tea she hadn't ordered. Her hands trembled as she reached for her laptop bag, but before she could move, Eric was standing beside her table. Close, he was both familiar and alien. The boy she'd loved had worn thrift store hoodies and perpetual exhaustion. This man wore expensive black fabric that moved like water, a watch that cost more than her yearly rent, and an expression of absolute control. Brenda. His voice was deeper than she remembered. Mother. Don't. The word came out sharper than intended. You don't get to say my name like we're old friends. We were more than friends. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat without invitation. May I? You already did. A slight smile touched his lips, the only hint of the Eric she'd known. You switched from literary translation to technical contracts. Smart move. More stable income. Her blood went cold. How do you know that? You still drink chamomile tea in the afternoon. You used to drink it at night before bed, but you've shifted your schedule. He gestured to the cup. Old habit. Answer the question, Eric. How do you know anything about my life? He leaned back, utterly calm. I pay attention. For 8 years. You paid attention for 8 years while I thought you were dead. Her voice rose despite her intention to stay controlled. The few remaining patrons glanced over. The man in the dark suit by the door shifted slightly. I was never dead, Brenda. I was protecting you. From what? From me. From what I had to become. She laughed bitterly. Cryptic bullshit. That's your explanation. After vanishing without a word, after letting me file a police report, after making me think I meant nothing, you show up 8 years later with fortune cookie philosophy. I know you're angry. You know nothing about me. I know you visit your mother's grave every 3rd Sunday. I know you have exactly 3 close friends and see them monthly. I know you pay your rent in cash and never post online. I know you're trying very hard to disappear, Brenda. The question is, from what? She stood abruptly, shoving her laptop into her bag. Stay away from me. I can't do that. Then I'll get a restraining order. That won't work. His tone wasn't threatening, just factual. But I'm not here to scare you. I'm here because things are changing, and you need to know the truth before someone else tells you. I don't want your truth. I want you gone. She turned and walked toward the exit, her pulse hammering. Eric didn't follow. He simply watched her go with those unreadable eyes, then lifted 2 fingers in a subtle gesture. Outside, Brenda gulped cold air and started walking. She made it 2 blocks before she noticed him. A man in a leather jacket, tattooed, keeping pace 30 feet behind. She walked faster. He matched her speed. He turned a corner. He followed. And Brenda realized with creeping horror. Eric had let her leave. But he'd never intended to let her go. Brenda didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table until 3 a.m., laptop glowing in the darkness, pulling at threads that refused to unravel cleanly. First, the Café. She searched its name and found ownership records buried in corporate filings. The building belonged to Redfield Holdings, LLC. Established 9 years ago. Primary investor, Eric D. Redfield. He owned the cafe. He'd always owned it. Her hands shook as she opened her rent portal. Her landlord was listed as Granite Property Management, a name she'd never questioned in 4 years. She dug deeper. Granite was a subsidiary of Sentinel Investments. Sentinel's board of directors included one name that made her stomach drop. E.D. Redfield, silent partner. He owned her building. She searched her email archives, pulling up client contracts. Her biggest client, a shipping logistics firm that provided 40% of her income, used external legal counsel. The law firm's name sat at the bottom of every contract in small print, Redfield and Associates. Coincidence? It had to be coincidence. But her hands were shaking harder now. She searched Eric D. Redfield and found exactly what he'd want her to find: a sleek website for Redfield Consulting Group. Services: corporate negotiation, international trade facilitation, risk management. Professional headshot: Eric in a suit, looking legitimate and forgettable. Client testimonials: a bland bio mentioning Harvard Business School and strategic advisory services. Nothing threatening. Nothing criminal. Just successful and boring. Too boring. At 4 a.m., she texted Megan, her friend who worked investigative journalism at the city paper. Need a favor. Confidential. Can you dig into someone for me? The response came at 9 a.m. Call me. Don't text. They met at a diner across town. Megan looked exhausted, her press badge still clipped to her jacket. She slid a USB drive across the table. I can't believe you're connected to this, Megan said quietly. Connected to what? Eric Redfield isn't a consultant, Brenda. He's a facilitator. The kind of person who makes problems disappear for people who can't afford to have problems. There are rumors, nothing provable, nothing we could ever print, that he brokers deals between organizations that don't exist on paper. What kind of organizations? Megan's expression was grim. The kind with body counts. Open the file at home. Encrypted. Password is your birthday. And Brenda. She gripped her hand. If even half of what's in there is true, you need to run. Today. Back in her apartment, Brenda opened the file with trembling fingers. 12 documents. Financial records with names redacted. Offshore accounts. Shipping manifests for cargo that didn't match customs declarations. And photographs. Eric At's, boardrooms, private airstrips, always in the background, always watching. The final document was a police report from 6 years ago. A witness statement about a missing person case. The witness had been found dead 3 days after giving the statement. Single gunshot. Professional execution. The witness had mentioned seeing Eric Redfield at the scene. Brenda closed her laptop and looked around her apartment. Her safe, controlled, forgettable life. Every piece of it touched by him. Brenda spent 3 days down a rabbit hole that had no bottom. The encrypted files Megan provided were just the surface. Once she knew what to look for, the digital breadcrumbs multiplied. Dark web forums where Eric's name appeared in coded references. Shipping routes that connected legitimate businesses to ghost ports. Financial transactions that moved through so many shell companies they became untraceable, almost. Eric D. Redfield wasn't just connected to criminal organizations. He was the bridge between them. Mediator. Broker. The man who sat at tables where violence was currency and loyalty was purchased with blood. He negotiated territory disputes between rival families. He facilitated weapons shipments disguised as industrial equipment. He made people disappear, either into new lives or shallow graves, depending on what the client paid for. 12 suspected murders. 0 convictions. 0 arrests. Not even a single interrogation on record. His empire was built on 2 principles: fear and precision. He never left evidence. Never made unnecessary enemies. Never got his hands dirty unless absolutely required. Those who worked for him were terrified of him. Those who opposed him didn't last long enough to testify. And his reach was staggering. Real estate holdings across 3 states. Silent partnerships in logistics companies, security firms, legal practices. Investments that looked clean on paper but funneled money from sources that would never survive scrutiny. Then Brenda found her own name. It appeared in a financial ledger dated 7 years ago. A spreadsheet labeled Protected Assets. Her address. Her full legal name. And beside it, a monthly allocation. $1,200. She cross-referenced the dates. 7 years ago, she'd been hospitalized with pneumonia. She'd nearly drowned in medical debt. Then mysteriously, the bills had been reduced. The hospital claimed insurance coverage she didn't have. She'd been too grateful to question it. Eric had paid. She dug further, her horror mounting with each discovery. Her rent, subsidized through phantom building maintenance credits that appeared on her account quarterly. Her dentist visit 2 years ago. Insurance she didn't carry somehow covered the procedure. Even her car repair last year. The mechanic had called back saying a corporate discount reduced her bill by 60%. All of it, Eric, for 8 years. The most damning document was a security contract dated 3 months after his disappearance. It outlined 24/7 monitoring protocols for a high-value protected individual. The contract included residential surveillance, route tracking, threat assessment, and neutralization authorization for credible dangers. The protected individual's code name, Sparrow. Her childhood nickname. The one only Eric had ever used. Brenda read the contract 3 times, each word sinking deeper like a stone in dark water. He hadn't just watched her. He'd controlled her entire life. Her rent, her health, her safety. All constructed by a man who killed people for a living. She'd thought she was invisible, unremarkable. She'd been his most valuable possession the entire time. And the most terrifying question wasn't what he'd done. It was why. Brenda saw him the moment she left the bodega. Tall, heavy build, wearing a gray jacket that didn't quite conceal the bulk beneath. He stood across the street, pretending to look at his phone, but his eyes tracked her with predatory focus. Not one of Eric's men. She'd learned to recognize them, the way they maintained distance, the professional disinterest masking constant vigilance. This man's attention was different. Hungry. Intent. She walked faster, clutching her grocery bag against her chest. Behind her, footsteps matched her pace. Her apartment was 4 blocks away. She made it 2 before breaking into a run. "Hey!" The voice behind her was rough, urgent. "I just want to talk." Brenda didn't look back. She ran, her breath coming in gasps, her keys already in her hand. She heard him gaining, heavier footsteps, closer now. She turned the corner onto her street and sprinted the final 50 feet. Her hands shook as she jammed the key into the lock. The door opened. She threw herself inside and slammed it shut, engaging both deadbolts and the chain. Through the peephole, she watched him stop at the building entrance, staring up at her window. He stood there for 5 minutes, then pulled out his phone, made a call and walked away. Brenda sank to the floor, her entire body trembling. She called 911, gave them a description, was told an officer would patrol the area. The responder's tone suggested she shouldn't hold her breath. She didn't sleep. Every sound in the building made her jump. At 3 a.m., she finally drifted into nightmares about gray jackets and footsteps that never stopped. The sirens woke her at dawn. Brenda stood at her window, watching red and blue lights paint the alley 3 blocks south. Police tape. Forensics van. Detectives standing over something covered with a yellow tarp. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered without thinking. "Hello. Don't go outside today." Eric's voice. Almost gentle. "The police will canvass the neighborhood. Tell them you saw nothing. Heard nothing. What did you do? I protected you. That man was sent to hurt you. He was paid to follow you home, confirm your address, and report back. He wouldn't have been the one to pull the trigger, but he was the beginning of something you don't want to see the end of. You killed him. I removed a threat. You murdered someone. I saved your life." His voice hardened slightly. "There's a difference, Brenda. And you're about to learn exactly how significant that difference is. Why is this happening? Why would anyone want to hurt me? Because you matter to me. And people who want to hurt me have finally figured that out. I told you things were changing. This is what I meant. Eric, stay inside. My people are watching your building. You're safe." The line went dead. Through her window, Brenda watched the coroner's van arrive. Watched them load the body. Watched her neighbors gather and gossip. And she understood. Eric's protection wasn't kindness. It was ownership. And the price of being owned was becoming complicit in everything he did. The knock came at noon. 3 sharp raps, professional and inevitable. Brenda looked through the peephole and saw a woman in a tailored charcoal suit, holding a leather briefcase. Mid-40s, dark hair pulled back severely, expression unreadable. Not police. Not a threat. One of Eric's. "Ms. Ivy, my name is Caroline Torres. I work for Mr. Redfield. I have something he wants you to see." Her voice carried through the door, calm and matter-of-fact. "I'm unarmed. I'll stand in the hallway while you review the contents. You can call the police if you prefer, but I think you'll want privacy for this." Brenda opened the door slowly, chain still engaged. Caroline held up the briefcase. "May I?" Against every instinct, Brenda released the chain. Caroline entered, set the briefcase on the kitchen table, and stepped back toward the door. She entered a combination, opened it, and removed a single manila folder. The tab read, "Brenda's heavy protective operations." "I'll wait outside," Caroline said and left. Brenda stared at the folder for a full minute before opening it. The first page was a surveillance photo dated 8 years ago, 2 months after Eric's disappearance. Brenda leaving her college apartment, looking hollow-eyed and thin. Someone had been watching even then. She flipped through the stack. Hundreds of photos. Brenda at the grocery store. The library. Walking to the bodega. Each one time-stamped, dated, catalogued like evidence in a case file. But it wasn't just surveillance. Threat assessment reports filled the next section. Dates, names, incidents she'd never known about. A man who'd followed her home from a bar 4 years ago. Report marked neutralized. A former client who'd become obsessive after a phone consultation. Report marked relocated. Someone who'd tried to access her medical records. Report marked dealt with. 7 incidents. 7 threats she'd never even noticed. 7 interventions that happened in shadows she never saw. The financial records came next. Line items in cold numerical precision. Rent subsidy monthly. $1,200. Medical debt relief January 2023. $18,450. Vehicle repair assistance, June 2024. $840. Dental emergency coverage, March 2023. $2,100. A budget line near the bottom read. Protective detail, ongoing. Annual cost, $240,000. Brenda's vision blurred. $250,000. Every year. For 8 years. $2 million spent keeping her safe from threats she didn't know existed. The final page was a handwritten note on heavy paper. Eric's handwriting, she'd recognize it anywhere. The same script that used to leave love notes in her textbooks. Brenda. I know this looks like surveillance. Like control. Like everything you're afraid of. But it's love. The only kind I could give you from where I am. You deserved a normal life. 50. I couldn't give you those things and stay in your world. So I left your world and protected it from mine. I never wanted you to know. But now you're in danger, and secrets won't keep you safe anymore. Forgive me for not letting you go. I never could. Brenda folded the note carefully. Her hands steady despite the chaos in her chest. Outside her door, Caroline waited in silence. And Brenda understood. Eric hadn't been haunting her. He'd been keeping her alive. They took her from the parking garage beneath her building. 3 men, efficient and silent. A cloth over her mouth. Sharp chemical smell. Darkness swallowing her whole. When Brenda woke, she was zip-tied to a metal chair in a warehouse that stank of oil and rust. A man in an expensive suit stood 10 feet away, smoking a cigarette. Older, graying, with eyes like dead fish. You're awake. Good. His accent was thick, Eastern European. I am Viktor Kozlov. You know this name. Brenda's head throbbed. No. Eric Redfield knows. He cost me $12 million and 3 very valuable associates. So now I cost him something valuable. Victor smiled without warmth. You. I'm nobody. I haven't seen Eric in 8 years. Lies bore me. Victor pulled up a chair, sitting close enough that she could smell tobacco and cologne. Eric Redfield spends $250,000 every year keeping you alive. Kills anyone who looks at you wrong. You think this is for nobody? He laughed. You are his weakness. And weaknesses must be exploited. Terror crystallized into understanding. She wasn't a person here. She was leverage. A weapon aimed at Eric's heart. He won't come, she whispered. He's already coming. 20 minutes later, the warehouse lights died. Emergency backups flickered on, casting red shadows. Then gunfire. Sharp cracks echoing through metal and concrete. Shouting in Russian. More gunfire. Screams that ended abruptly. Victor grabbed Brenda, pressing a gun to her temple. Redfield. I have her. The warehouse went silent. Then Eric stepped from the shadows. He wore black, tactical gear she'd never seen him in. His hands were steady. His face was empty of everything except purpose. Blood spattered his neck and jaw, not his own. Let her go, Victor. You cost me everything. Eric moved. 3 shots, impossibly fast. Victor's men dropped before they could raise their weapons. Victor swung his gun toward Eric, but Eric was already there, disarming him with brutal efficiency, breaking his wrist with an audible crack. Victor screamed. Eric didn't blink. You touched her. Eric's voice was flat, dead. That was your last mistake. The final shot was execution. Professional. Final. Brenda couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she'd just witnessed. Eric cut her restraints with a knife that appeared from nowhere, lifted her effortlessly, and carried her through the warehouse. Bodies lay in their wake. 6 men, all dead, all killed by the man holding her like she was made of glass. In the car, Brenda finally found her voice. "I don't know you." Eric's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Blood, someone else's blood, stained his collar. "You're the only one who ever did. That man back there, that killer, is who I became to keep you alive. I never asked for this. I know." His voice cracked just slightly. "But I couldn't survive losing you. So I became someone who could protect you from everything, including myself." Brenda stared at him. This stranger wearing Eric's face. This monster who just murdered 6 men without hesitation. And the worst part was understanding. He'd done it all for her. Every death, every sin, every terrible choice. Love had turned him into this. And she didn't know whether to run or stay. The FBI agent's card sat on Brenda's kitchen table like a loaded gun. Special Agent Morrison had been polite, almost sympathetic. "Viktor Kozlov's organization is dismantled, but others will come. You're a known vulnerability now. We can give you a new identity, new city, new life. Complete separation from Eric Redfield and everything he touches. True invisibility." The thing she'd spent 8 years building for herself, now offered on official government letterhead. "You have 48 hours to decide," Morrison had said. "After that, we can't guarantee your safety." Brenda hadn't left her apartment in 3 days. Eric's people maintained watch outside. She could see them in rotating shifts, silent guardians of a life she wasn't sure she wanted anymore. The knock came at midnight. Eric stood in her doorway, looking more tired than she'd ever seen him. No designer clothes, no tactical gear, just jeans and a dark shirt, and eyes that carried the weight of everything he'd done. "May I come in?" She stepped aside. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the FBI card visible between them. Eric saw it, said nothing. "I owe you the truth," he said finally. "All of it. No omissions." So he told her. About his father's gambling debts to the Kozlov family. About the night they came to collect, threatening his mother's life. About the choice he'd been given. Join them or watch everyone he loved die. "I was 21 years old," Eric said quietly. "I thought I could do it for a year. Pay the debt. Get out. Come back to you." He laughed bitterly. "I was an idiot. You don't leave the Mafia. You either die or you become valuable enough that they can't afford to kill you. So you became valuable. I became indispensable. Mediator. Someone who could negotiate between organizations without loyalty to any side. Kept me alive. It made me powerful." He met her eyes. "And it made me a monster. Why didn't you just tell me?" "Because I loved you too much to drag you into it. Because I knew you'd try to save me, and they'd kill you for it. Because the only way to protect you was to disappear completely." His voice broke. "I chose your life over having you in mine. I'd make that choice again." Brenda looked at the FBI card. Eric. At the 8 years of surveillance photos she'd burned but couldn't forget. "The FBI can give me freedom," she said. "Yes. A life where I'm not watched, not controlled, not owned by your choices. Yes. Is that what you want?" Eric's expression shattered. "I want you to be safe. I want you to be happy. If that means losing you forever." He stood abruptly, heading for the door. "I won't fight it. For the first time, Brenda, the choice is yours, not mine." He paused at the threshold, his back to her. "I love you. I've loved you every day for 8 years. But love isn't enough justification for what I've done, for what I am." He turned slightly, profile sharp in the dim light. "Choose the life you deserve. Not the one I built around you." Then he left. Brenda sat alone in her apartment. The apartment he'd paid for, in the city he'd protected, living the life he'd constructed while pretending she'd built it herself. 2 doors. 2 futures. One led to witness protection. Anonymity. True freedom from Eric Redfield and his dark empire. A chance to finally be invisible on her own terms. The other led to him. To complicity and blood and loving a monster who'd killed for her. To accepting that her independence had always been an illusion, but that the man who created that illusion had done it out of devotion, not control. Brenda picked up her keys. She walked toward the door. And the choice she made, the door she opened, the future she stepped into, remained hers alone. Some endings aren't meant to be witnessed. Some choices are too sacred to share. Thank you for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more.